Sign the deed over to me, Dad. It's the smart move. My son Brandon said this to me in my own living room on a Tuesday evening in March, sliding a manila folder across my coffee table like he was closing a real estate deal, instead of asking his father to hand over a lifetime of work. I just nodded slowly, picked up my reading glasses, and told him I'd think about it. Brandon smiled. He thought he'd won. He had no idea that his old man, a retired estate planning attorney with 38 years at the firm, had spent the last 6 months building a case that would end his marriage, his career, and any chance he had of touching 1 square inch of my property in Sarasota, Florida. If you've ever watched your own child turn into someone you don't recognize, drop your city in the comments below. I want to know I'm not the only one. My name is Theodore Whitfield. Most folks call me Ted. I'm 67 years old, widowed since 2019 when my wife Rosalind passed from ovarian cancer, and until about 2 years ago, I genuinely believed I had raised a good man. Brandon is my only child. He's 34, married to a woman named Sloan who works at some marketing firm downtown, and he's been a registered financial advisor at one of those mid-tier wealth management outfits for about 9 years now. From the outside, he looked successful. New Tesla in the driveway, house out in Lakewood Ranch, country club membership, Sloan posting pictures on Instagram from Cabo and Aspen and somewhere in Tuscany. What none of those pictures showed was the $32,000 in credit card debt he was carrying, the second mortgage on the Lakewood Ranch house, and the fact that his commission checks had been shrinking for 2 straight years because he lost his 3 biggest clients. I didn't know any of this back in March of last year when he started showing up more often. I just thought my son missed his old man. That Tuesday evening when he slid the folder across my coffee table, he came armed with a whole speech. He practiced it. I could tell by the way he kept glancing at Sloan for affirmation, the way she nodded on cue every 15 seconds like a metronome. Dad, you're 67. You're alone in this big house. The property taxes alone are killing you, and we both know real estate in Sarasota has appreciated to where the capital gains exposure is going to be brutal when something happens to you. If we transfer the deed now, set it up as a life estate, you keep living here as long as you want, but we avoid probate. We step around the gift tax issues, and the asset is protected from any long-term care situation down the road. Medicaid look-back is 5 years, Dad. The clock starts ticking the day we sign. Every year we wait costs the family money. He said the family like he was including me. He wasn't. I knew that even then. I asked him a few questions, just gentle ones. I asked him who would be on the deed. He said himself and Sloan jointly. I asked about my homestead exemption. He said it would transfer cleanly, that he'd talked to a buddy who specialized in this. I asked about my reverse mortgage protection, since I had no reverse mortgage and never planned to get one, and he didn't even blink. He just said his buddy would handle all of that. That was my first confirmation. Because any actual attorney, any actual advisor, would have known that what he was describing wasn't a life estate. It was an outright transfer with retained occupancy, and it would have stripped me of every protection Florida law gives a homestead owner. He either didn't know what he was talking about, or he did know and he was lying to my face. Knowing my son, it was both. Half ignorant, half deceitful. He'd convinced himself that the lie was the truth because he wanted it to be. Sloan reached over and patted my hand. Her wedding ring is a 3-carat cushion cut. I noticed because Rosalind's was 3/4 of a carat, and we'd saved for 2 years to buy it in 1983. Ted, we just want what's best for you. We worry about you here all alone. I told them I appreciated their concern. I told them I'd take the paperwork to my own attorney for review, and I'd get back to them in a week or 2. Brandon's smile tightened. Just a fraction. Sloan glanced at him. Dad, the thing is, my buddy Vince already drew these up specifically for our situation. Bringing another attorney is just going to run up billable hours and probably confuse things. Vince does this every day. All the same, I said, I've always used my own counsel. Old habits, you understand. They left about 20 minutes later. From my front window, I watched Brandon start gesturing in the driveway. Both hands going, and Sloan got in the passenger seat and slammed the door. They sat there for almost 10 minutes before they pulled out. I closed the curtain, sat back down on my couch, and I cried. I want to be honest about that. I cried because I knew. I had known for a while, but that was the night I couldn't pretend anymore. Let me back up. 6 months earlier, in September of the previous year, I was reconciling my Schwab statements. I do this every month. I've done it every month since 1987. It's just habit. I had 3 accounts at the time: a traditional IRA, a Roth I'd been converting in chumps, and a regular taxable brokerage account that held about $410,000 in mostly municipal bonds and dividend stocks. Boring stuff. The kind of portfolio a retired estate attorney builds when he wants to sleep at night. I noticed a wire transfer. $12,000 outgoing to an account labeled simply B. Whitfield Investments, LLC. I had no recollection of authorizing it. My first thought was that I'd done it and forgotten. 67 isn't ancient, but I won't pretend I remember everything. I called Schwab. The rep pulled it up. The transfer had been authorized through the online portal with my username and password and the 2-factor code from my phone. Except I'd never gotten a 2-factor code. And the IP address it came from was in Lakewood Ranch. I sat with that for 2 days before I did anything. I kept hoping I was wrong. Maybe Brandon had asked me to send him money and I'd forgotten. Maybe I had used the portal myself in some half-asleep moment. I went through my email, my texts, my voicemails. There was nothing. No requests, no thank you, no acknowledgement of any kind. So I started looking. Quietly. I found 7 more transfers going back 14 months. Most were smaller, between $1,500 and $4,000. One in the previous May had been $22,000. Total damage, $47,350. Every single one had gone to that same LLC. Every single one had been authorized late at night, between 11 and 2 in the morning when I was asleep, and every single one corresponded with a visit Brandon had made to my house in the prior week. He had a key. He had access to my mail. And once, about a year and a half earlier, I'd asked him to help me reset a password on the Schwab portal because I'd locked myself out. He'd sat at my desk for about 20 minutes. I'd made him a cup of coffee. I had thought nothing of it. Now I understood. He'd installed something. Or he'd written down what I typed. Or he'd captured my recovery codes. I'm not enough of a tech expert to know exactly which method, but the result was the same. He'd been stealing from me for over a year, and he'd structured it so the timing always gave him an alibi if I noticed. The withdrawals were never the day after he visited. They were always 4, 5, 6 days later when his presence at my house wouldn't seem connected. That kind of patience. That kind of calculation. From my own son. I want to tell you something else I figured out that week, because it cut deeper than the $47,000. I went back to my own checkbook and my home maintenance records. After Rosalind died, Brandon had been around a lot. He'd helped me sort through her things. He'd brought groceries. He'd come over for Sunday dinners. And during that time, I had paid for a great deal more than dinner. I had paid for his country club initiation as a graduation gift when he made senior advisor. $18,000. I had paid off Sloan's law school loans as a wedding present because they'd asked me to instead of registering for housewares. $41,000. I'd lent him $60,000 to make the down payment on the Lakewood Ranch house, with a handshake promise to pay it back when his commissions stabilized. He never paid back a dollar. I'd never pressed him. Ed and the cars I'd helped with, the vacations I'd treated them to so they could come visit, the medical bills when Sloan had her gallbladder out and they were between insurance plans. Conservatively, in the 5 years since Rosalind died, I had given my son and his wife somewhere north of $240,000, not loaned, given, and he was still stealing from me. While planning to take my house, I sat at my kitchen table the night I finished those calculations, and I'll be honest, I considered just giving him the house. Just signing the paper, letting it be his problem. Letting Rosalind's memory of this house be his problem. I was tired. I was 67 years old, and I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. But then I thought about my granddaughter. Brandon and Sloan don't have kids, but my older sister's daughter has a little girl, Hazel, who's 8. And Hazel had spent 2 weeks with me the previous summer, and we'd built a tomato cage out in the backyard. And she'd asked me if she could come live with me when she grew up because my house was the prettiest house she'd ever seen. And I thought, no. This is not what Rosalind and I worked for. This is not what my parents came up from Tallahassee dirt poor for. This is not what I'm going to leave as my last lesson on this earth, which is that if you steal from your father long enough and slick enough, you eventually get the house too. So I called my old colleague Margaret Devereaux. Margaret had been a litigator at our firm before she went private. She specialized in elder financial exploitation cases, and she was meaner than a wet cat when she wanted to be. I told her everything over a long lunch at a place we used to go to in St. Armand's. She didn't blink. She just took notes on a yellow legal pad, the way she'd taken notes for 35 years. Ted, we have 2 options. 1, we go to the police now with what you have. Brandon gets arrested, charged with grand theft and possibly elder exploitation under Florida statute. He'll lose his Series 7, his Series 66, his entire career. He'll likely do 18 months, somewhere minimum security, but he'll do time. The marriage probably ends. Sloan is almost certainly involved, given the timing of the spending, so she may face charges too if we can prove conspiracy. I asked what option 2 was. Option 2, we wait. We let him do something bigger. Something so unambiguous that there's no defense. Right now, a good attorney could argue you authorized the transfers and forgot. We don't want him to have any wiggle room. We want him caught with his hand around the throat of a transaction he can't possibly explain. And we want the optics to be clean for a jury. Because, trust me, family theft cases get ugly fast, and you want to look like the white-haired retired attorney whose son betrayed him, not like a vindictive old man entrapping his kid. I asked her what option 2 would cost me. She looked me right in the eye. Your relationship with him. Permanently. Probably. There's no version of this where Brandon comes out the other side and you 2 go fishing on weekends, Ted. You need to know that going in. I told her I'd already lost him. I just hadn't admitted it yet. We spent the next 4 months building the architecture. Margaret had me change every password, every PIN, every recovery email. She had me set up new accounts at a different bank entirely, accounts Brandon didn't know about, where I quietly moved the bulk of my real assets. I left enough in the old accounts to look normal. About $60,000, bait money. I had Margaret retain a forensic IT specialist, a young woman named Priya who'd done contract work for the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Priya came to my house, swept my computer, and within an hour had identified a remote access tool that had been installed on it about 16 months earlier. She didn't remove it, she let it stay there, but she set up monitoring so we could see every keystroke Brandon's installation captured and every command he sent from his end. We had him cold from that moment on. Every time he logged in, we knew. I also called my neighbor Hank, who'd lived next door for 22 years. Hank is 71, a retired naval chief, and he loves me like a brother because I helped him through his wife's funeral in 2017. I told him what was happening. He cried. Then he got angry. Then he told me whatever I needed. He was in. I had Hank install a doorbell camera with cloud backup and a second discrete camera covering my driveway. I started keeping a log of Brandon's visits, what time he arrived, what time he left, where he went inside the house. I made sure to greet him warmly every single time. I made sure to seem a little forgetful, a little tired, a little overwhelmed by my taxes and my insurance. I let him think the ground was getting softer under me by the day. Now to the trap. In late February, about 3 weeks before that Tuesday evening with the folder, I told Brandon over Sunday dinner that I'd been looking at my finances and I was worried I had too much cash sitting around doing nothing. I said I'd inherited some money from my late cousin Vernon's estate, which was a complete fiction, but a plausible one because Vernon had actually died the previous fall. I said it was about $190,000, and that it was just sitting in a money market earning almost nothing, and that I felt foolish leaving it there. But I didn't know what to do with it. You should have seen Brandon's eyes. I have never in my life watched a man do calculus that fast. He set down his fork. He took a sip of water. He pretended to think about it for a respectable 30 seconds. Then he said, "Dad, I can help you with that. I literally do this for a living. Let me set up a managed account. We'll get you into a balanced portfolio. You'll be earning real returns within 30 days. I won't even charge you my normal advisory fee." I told him I'd think about it. A week later, I told him I wanted to move forward. I asked him to put together the paperwork. He showed up the following Tuesday with the folder, except the folder didn't just contain investment management paperwork. It also contained the deed transfer documents. He'd decided to upsell me. He decided that if his father was confused enough about money to need help managing $190,000, his father was confused enough to sign over a paid-off house too. That was the night I told you about at the start. The night I cried after they left. The next morning, I called Margaret and I called Detective Ramos of the Sarasota County Sheriff's Economic Crimes Unit, and I called my niece's husband, who's a CPA, to make sure my paper trail was clean for the inevitable subpoenas. We let it run another 6 weeks. I told Brandon I'd reviewed the investment paperwork with my own attorney and that we'd revised it slightly, but I was ready to move forward on the managed account. I declined the deed transfer for now, told him I needed more time to think about it, but I implied I was leaning toward yes. He bought it. He bought every word. We met at his office with his branch compliance officer present, and I authorized the transfer of $190,000 from a real account I had set up specifically for this purpose into the managed account he would oversee. Margaret had structured the agreement to give him discretionary trading authority, with a few extremely specific restrictions buried in paragraph 14 that he didn't read carefully enough. Within 9 days, he had moved $62,000 of it into a private placement opportunity that, when Priya traced it, turned out to be his own LLC. The same LLC that had received my $47,000 in stolen wires the previous year. He didn't even bother to use a different shell. We had him. Detective Ramos got the warrant on a Wednesday. They picked him up at his office on a Thursday afternoon in front of his colleagues in handcuffs. They picked Sloan up at her marketing firm an hour later because the LLC was in both their names and the spending patterns made conspiracy obvious. The state attorney's office charged them both with grand theft over $50,000, scheme to defraud, exploitation of an elderly person under Florida Statute 825.103, and unauthorized access to a computer system. I want to tell you what it felt like to give the victim impact statement, because I've watched a lot of these stories online and I notice they always end with the satisfying moment, but they never quite get inside what it's actually like. It felt like a funeral. That's the only honest way I can describe it. Brandon sat at the defense table in a suit I had paid for, and when he turned and looked at me, his eyes were not the eyes of my son. They were the eyes of a stranger who hated me for surviving him. I read my statement. I talked about Rosalind, and about the boy he had been, and about the man he had chosen to become. I asked the judge for restitution, but I told her I was not asking for the maximum sentence. I told her my son needed to face consequences, but I didn't need him destroyed. I needed him changed. Judge Ortega gave Brandon 30 months in state prison, with eligibility for work release at the 18-month mark and 10 years of probation thereafter. He has to repay every dollar with interest. His Series 7 and Series 66 are gone forever. He'll never work in financial services again. Sloan got 18 months and 5 years probation. She filed for divorce from inside the women's facility in Lowell. The Lakewood Ranch house was sold to satisfy the restitution order, and the country club refunded what was left of his initiation. The Tesla was repossessed. I want to tell you about something that happened about 4 months after the sentencing. I got a letter, handwritten, from the prison. It was 3 pages long. Brandon told me he had been seeing the prison's counselor twice a week, and that he had been thinking about his mother and about the kind of man she would have wanted him to be. He told me he had been telling himself for years that I was rich and selfish and that taking from me wasn't really stealing because it would all come to him eventually anyway. He told me Sloan had encouraged that thinking, but he wasn't blaming her because he had been the one making the choices. He told me he was ashamed and that he didn't expect me to write back, but he wanted me to know. I sat with that letter for 2 weeks before I wrote back. I told him I loved him. I told him I would not be visiting him in prison, but that when he got out, if he was a different man, I would meet him for coffee and we could talk. I told him his mother would have been heartbroken by what he did, but she would also have been the first one to forgive him, and I was trying to be a little more like her. I told him not to write me again until he had something genuine to say. He hasn't written since, and that's okay. Time will do its work or it won't. The reason I'm telling this story is not because I think I'm a hero. I'm not. I'm a tired old man who lost his son a long time before the day my son lost me. The reason I'm telling it is because I know there are people watching this who are right now where I was 3 years ago. You're seeing the small things. The bank statement that doesn't quite add up. The visit that's too convenient. The favor that turns into a demand. The grandchild who isn't being raised to know your name. The daughter-in-law or son-in-law whose smile doesn't reach their eyes. I want you to listen to me. The kindest thing you can do for a child who is stealing from you is to stop them. Not with a lecture, not with a guilt trip, with a consequence so clear and so legally sound that they cannot wriggle out of it. Because if you don't stop them, they will not stop themselves. That's not how human beings work. We escalate. We rationalize. We harden. The Brandon who stole $1,200 in the spring became the Brandon who stole $22,000 in May, became the Brandon who tried to take my house in March. Every theft made the next theft easier. I gave my son consequences. I think, eventually, he'll thank me. Even if he doesn't, I'll know I did the last real act of fatherhood I had left in me. I drew a line. I said this far and not 1 inch further, and I did it not to punish him, but to give him a chance, however small, of becoming someone his mother could be proud of when he meets her again on the other side. I'm still in the house. Hazel comes to visit twice a year. I planted 4 new tomato plants this spring, and they're already coming in. Hank and I had a beer on the porch last Friday night, and we didn't talk about any of this. We just listened to the cicadas and watched the sun go down over the bay, and that was enough. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. If this story made you think of someone in your own life, don't wait as long as I did. Make the call. Talk to a lawyer. Set up the cameras. Protect what you and your spouse worked your whole life to build, because it isn't just money. It's the proof that you were here, and that you mattered, and that you loved someone enough to leave them something. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read everyone. And tell me, if you ever had to draw a line with someone you love, did you do it sooner than I did, or later? I have a feeling I'm going to learn a lot from your answers. God bless, and I'll see you in the next story. I've had a lot of quiet evenings on my porch since the sentencing, and I keep coming back to the same thought. Brandon didn't become a thief the night he wired that first $1,200 out of my Schwab account. He became a thief years before that, in 100 small moments I either didn't see or chose not to see. The country club initiation I paid for, the down payment I lent him, the law school loans I cleared for Sloan, every one of those gifts was given in love. But love without wisdom is just fertilizer for whatever's already growing in a person's heart. I was watering weeds and calling it generosity. That's the part I want anyone listening to really sit with. Cause and effect doesn't skip a generation, and it doesn't take a holiday. Every time I said yes when I should have said, let's talk about that, every time I wrote a check instead of asking a hard question, I was teaching my son that consequences were optional for him. And a man who believes consequences are optional will eventually do something that brings the consequences down on his head like a hammer. Brandon's prison sentence didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of 30 years of small permissions I gave him without thinking. I've come to believe that real love for the people in your life rests on 3 legs, and if any one of them is missing, the whole stool tips over. The first leg is character. You have to be the kind of person who keeps your word, pays your debts, and tells the truth even when it costs you. I tried to be that man, but I didn't insist that Brandon become that man. And there's the difference. The second leg is judgment. You have to think clearly about what you're seeing, even when what you're seeing is your own child. I missed a lot of warning signs because I wanted to miss them. Margaret saw what I couldn't see, and that's why I called her. Wisdom sometimes means knowing whose eyes to borrow when your own are clouded by love. The third leg is the hardest. It's the willingness to stand on your own feet and do the difficult thing when the difficult thing is what's required. I almost didn't. I almost just signed the deed and let him have it because I was tired and grieving and lonely. The night I decided not to was the night I got my self-respect back. If you're watching this and someone in your life is doing to you what Brandon did to me, I'm not going to tell you it'll be easy to draw the line. It won't. You may lose the relationship. You may lose the holidays. You may lose the version of your family you thought you had, but you cannot lose what was never really yours, and a son who steals from his father was already gone before you noticed. What you'll gain is the chance to look in the mirror at the end of your days and know you didn't go quietly. You stood up. You loved him enough to let him fall, so he might one day stand up too.